Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Julie Shields-Rutina and I'm the Director of College Planning, Education and Training at MEFA. And I want to welcome you tonight to our MEFA webinar on financial aid, appeals, and paying for college. I am joined by my two colleagues this evening, Stephanie Wells and Jonathan Hughes, and they will be monitoring the question and answer section. So we have a full webinar with lots of information, but if you do have a burning question and you want to ask it, we ask that you ask it in the question and answer section at the either bottom or top of your screen. You also have some audio settings that allow you to control the volume. And we have disabled chat because there are a lot of you. It's a very large crowd tonight. And so we're just going to monitor the question and answer section. If you would like live transcript, you can press the closed captioning, the CC button, and that will allow you to see the words on your screen. And then of course you have the button that you can leave if you need to. We are recording this webinar tonight, and tomorrow we will send you the recording. And so you'll have that to refer back to or to share with anyone who wasn't able to join us this evening. I'm going to say just a couple of words about MEFA. If you don't know MEFA, we are a not-for-profit state authority that has been around since 1982, and we help families plan, save, and pay for college. And we do that in many ways. And one of the ways we do that is through webinars like this. So you can always return and visit our mefa.org/events page for future webinars, and there are other ways you can access all of our resources, and you can always call us, email, and I believe there's a slide on that at the end. But this evening, this is a very large crowd, and that tells us that it's a really important topic. And we're so glad, and I feel so honored that we have a terrific panel for you tonight. This is a panel of 6 practicing financial aid and other college administration type folks who have a huge amount of experience in the process of admissions, financial aid, all things college. And they are going to have so much to share with you this evening on this very important topic. So I am thrilled, and I'm going to pass it right over. I'm going to let them introduce themselves and tell you a little about them and their institutions. And then I have a series of questions taken from those questions that you have been asking MEFA over the last number of weeks. And so we'll cover this important topic of financial aid appeals and the college bill. And here is the information. I'll put it up at the end so that you can always ask questions, post questions to MEFA in the future at our 1-800 number or at collegeplanning@mefa.org. All right, I will stop sharing. And we'll start, and I'll have you panelists, welcome. I'll have you introduce yourselves.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ryan Forsythe. I am the Vice President for Enrollment here at Worcester State University. A special thank you to Penelope, the one person that said thank you in the chat. Hello, Penelope. And hello, everybody else. Really glad you're here tonight. I am from a regional public university in Massachusetts called Worcester State. We're right in the center of Worcester in Worcester, Massachusetts. And we are very glad to have a medium-sized campus with a medium-sized student body, a number of different academic programs, approximately 60 different academic programs. And really, really glad to be here with you tonight. Thanks.
All right, remembering to unmute myself. Hello, everybody. My name is Iris Scotus. I'm the Associate Vice President of Enrollment and Dean of Admission at Dean College. It's always awkward being a dean at Dean, but here I am. I have been a dean for about 7 years. Prior to that, I worked with Caitlin at Quinsigamond Community College. Prior to that, I worked with Gail at Boston University. So we're a group that knows each other well. It's great to be with this panel. Dean is in Franklin, Massachusetts. We're a very small, about 1,200 student, less selective college. So we come at things a little differently than some of my colleagues here on the panel. So I think you'll get a good range of responses to many questions.
Good evening, everybody. It's great. This is my favorite time of year, getting out of the office, although I'm still technically in the office, but getting to talk with families. So I wish we could see you face to face, but nonetheless, it's enjoyable. And I come to you from Amherst College, a small liberal arts college of 1,800 students in Western Massachusetts. We have an open curriculum, which means, students take the courses that they want and then meet the major requirements. We are also distinctive because we have a need-blind admission policy. So we consider students irrespective of any ability to pay. And then we go on to meet the full demonstrated need of all of our students. And when we're packaging financial aid for our students, we do not include loans. So look forward to the conversation.
My name is Caitlin Laurie. I am Associate Director of Financial Aid at Quinsigamond Community College. I've been working in financial aid for about 11 years now. 9 of those have been at Quinsig, and the first 2 were at my alma mater, Clark University. So I have experience at both a high cost private 4-year school as well as a 2-year public institution, which is very accessible and affordable. So lots of experience. I'm happy to be here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ebony Marsala, and I am the Director of Financial Aid at Northeastern University. Northeastern is centered in the heart of Boston. We're well known for our experiential co-op program, and what that basically means is students have the opportunity to gain real life experience while pursuing their undergraduate degree. I've worked at Northeastern for 19 years. I worked with Gail as well as with Bill, so it's always great to see them here today. And so we are a large private institution, so I'll be able to kind of provide that perspective. So it's great to be here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bill Smith. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Student Financial Assistance at Stonehill College in Easton, which is a small Catholic liberal arts selective school. We do offer a variety of different types of aid, from merit scholarships to need-based packages. And so that's kind of a brief overview of where we are. I'm very excited to be here and look forward to this conversation.
Thank you all. So panelists, we have a large crowd, as I mentioned. This is an important topic, and I think a lot of families are very interested to learn about this. We've had, a year that none of us would ever have expected, and people are anxious about finances and thinking about their financial aid and appealing. So Bill, I'm going to ask you first. Can you just generally speak about the appeals process and sort of managing parents' expectations of what it is, what is it, what it isn't, all of that?
That's right. Good question. The basis of the conversation tonight is around coming up with ways for you to strategically position yourself to afford and select an institution. And that's a really important thing. You've gone through the part of the exercise of applying, and now you're at this kind of really exciting stage of selecting the institution. The one thing that I will say that all of the panelists, I think, appreciate, you're all here and you're partaking in a conversation that's really important to all of us, which should be important to all of the families, and that is around college cost and affordability. And so just the fact that you're here and you're interested in learning about that is a testament to the position that you're in. And so there's not a one size fits all. That's the real big message, I hope, the takeaway. When you were going through the process of applying to colleges, you had to stay organized, and you had to know, for this school, I needed to do this. And for this school, the process might have been a little bit different. When it comes to appealing aid or coming up with financing options for your school, that's going to be dependent on your specific financial situation and the processes at that specific institution. And so I think what you will hear over the course of the night is that the vast majority of schools have their own individual processes when it comes to appeals or aid strategies. You heard some strategies that Gail mentioned, and you heard some strategies that Caitlin mentioned, and they're very different, different approaches. It's going to behoove you to stay organized right through the process of deposit. So the processes that you will need to go through to either appeal or question your aid at a specific school is really dependent on that school. Financial aid professionals get a kind of, we put in this bubble and we often say it depends or maybe or something along the lines of, I don't know yet, but if you show me this, maybe I can explain that. And a lot of the reasons why that is because each school has its own parameters. And so pay attention to the different types of strategies, but at the end of the day, make sure you're staying organized and follow up with the specific schools that you're questioning, because their processes may be school dependent.
Thank you. So then, Gail, I'm going to ask you this question. It's a nuance of the financial aid process that families use a certain year's tax returns when they're applying for financial aid. And as you know, this year, these families with seniors were using the 2019 tax return information. And we know that between 2019 and 2020, a lot has changed for families. So that's a big question. How should families handle that?
Yeah, generally speaking, families should be thinking about the process, as a flowing from year to year. So schools, want to offer predictability. Families want to have predictability, but certainly every school on some level is building in an understanding that there can be fluctuations. Certainly, as Bill said, school resources may dictate how responsive and how immediate a school can be. The good thing about using 2019 income is that you can easily get it. The bad thing is that it's a trailing kind of year. So if things are relatively the same, whatever those changes are, they're going to catch up at some point and be taken into consideration. But if there's been a dramatic shift in income, the first thing you want to do is make sure that this is the year that you are completing your 2020 taxes on time. So the tax returns have already been extended 1 month, but if there's any chance that you can work with, your accountant or your tax preparer to have your 2020 taxes completed now, that would be ideal, because schools are going to need actually documented information about what that income looks like. And then, you do want to ask questions about what does that mean in the future? Are you going to need to provide, the 21 information in the future or not? So we'll start there.
Thank you. And Iris, I'd like to ask you, we've already a couple of times talked about the process of appeals, and we know it can be different at each school. But generally, can you let families know what does the process generally look like?
Sure. And I think between schools, there's some things that are very similar, and then other things in terms of the process, both that the family needs to complete and the process that is conducted at the college or university can be very different. Things that I think are similar are you need to communicate it, preferably in writing, whether that's by email or paper. Financial aid offices still take paper, but either way, if you're not sure what kind of information to provide, then certainly give those financial aid offices a call. Admissions offices can also sometimes help you explain what the process is, but ultimately it's going to go through the financial aid office. So some documentation of what is your situation? What are your circumstances? Have you had a change, as Gail was alluding to? Is your 2020 income significantly different than your 2019 income, which in this year of COVID, I'm not sure about my colleagues, but I know at Dean College, we are seeing many appeals based on loss of income through loss of jobs that were directly related to COVID. Also, in some cases, some significant medical expenses. We have an appeals committee at Dean College. So after that written communication comes in, we get together as a committee to make a decision. So it's not just one person making a decision. I'm coming off of that meeting this afternoon, actually, for this week. We meet every week. We actually had a family that not only had a loss of income, but a loss of life in their family. And unfortunately, that's not the first one that we have. I hope everybody who's with us tonight has been safe and healthy, but I don't want to make that assumption, as we've all been through some pretty rough times. And so the financial aid offices, we are all very aware and very sympathetic to the struggles that families are having. And so please feel free to share that with us as much as you're comfortable sharing. And then in those cases of a change of income or maybe a change or loss of assets, then whatever documentation you can provide, the more the better, to help us with that information. I know that many families are somewhat intimidated or concerned about how to have the conversation. What do I say? How do I explain this to you? And please understand that we try really hard not to be intimidating people. We are all in this business, and I know each of the panelists here quite well. We represent our fields well, and we're in this business because we want college students to be able to get the education they deserve and have an amazing future. And at the end of the day, there is a college for everyone. We should be able to make it work one way or another somewhere. And try not to be too concerned or afraid to talk to the offices. And if you're really not sure what to do, or it's not clear what a particular office needs from you, give a call or send an email, ask them what you should do. And we're all happy to help you through that process. So I think you will find some differences from one school to another, but explaining your circumstances and whatever documentation you could provide is the place to start.
Thank you, Iris. And Ryan, I'll ask you, are there differences with the appeals process between a public institution and a private institution?
Yeah, thanks for the question. There's significant differences in the ways that families make different higher education institutions affordable, right? So you think about all of the colleges and universities that are out there. You have big schools, you have small schools, you have expensive schools, you have less expensive schools. But every institution can be affordable for every student if the financial aid is able to support you correctly. At a private institution, you might have the potential to receive a significant amount of financial aid based on your academic record or based on some financial need. That higher cost institution might offer a significant amount of financial aid to make that higher cost affordable for the family. A public institution typically offers less financial aid. However, the cost of that public university or college starts lower. So again, both types of institutions can be affordable depending on the amount of financial aid a student receives. Now, there was a question in the chat about what exactly is an appeal? Well, from your colleges, if you apply for financial aid, you're going to receive a financial aid award or a financial aid package. That package might make that college affordable for you, or perhaps it might not. And if it doesn't make it affordable for you and your family, then that's where the appeal comes in. That's where you're requesting from that college, please let me provide you with a little bit more information so that you can reconsider whether or not I can be eligible for more financial aid. So the question that Julie asked was, is there a difference in the appeal process between a public and a private college or university? Well, the difference is that at a public institution, there's typically less financial aid, and at a private institution, there can be more financial aid. What that means is that when a student appeals, there is the potential for your financial aid package to be increased more significantly at a private institution and perhaps less significantly at a lower cost public university or college. Additionally, the different kinds of financial aid that are offered at different universities differs. So you could have institutional forms of financial aid, for instance, at a higher cost institution. The Babson Presidential Scholarship or the Bentley Dean Scholarship. Whereas at your public universities, it might be more common for you to receive the majority of your financial aid from federal or state resources. So when that appeal is reviewed, you might have the potential to receive a different amount of financial aid, but it could still be less at your public university than at your private.
Thank you. And so, Ebony, I have a question for you. I'm realizing that this is a difficult question. So I want to preface it by saying that I know you and I have worked together for a long time, and I know how many students you are able to help, and you and your office help so many students all the time. But my difficult question for you is, what would not be considered an appeal? What would not receive a positive response possibly from a college?
Thanks, Julie. And thank you, Ryan, for the kind of overview of what an appeal is. I think that is very helpful for the families kind of tuned in this evening. I have a negative task of like what we will not consider, but I think most families are aware of the things that we will look at. So obviously loss of income, decrease in the information that's provided on your 2019 tax forms, et cetera. Certain things that we will not look at are kind of personal choices, things that you're opting into. Sometimes families will write and say, you know, I'm hoping to purchase a boat, and, you know, this is what this is for. And so, you know, that's less of a circumstance that has happened to you. With job loss, there's less kind of an ability to make any choices. Medical expenses, usually these things are kind of outside of your realm of control. Also, things we cannot look at for most places are consumer debt. We often can't look at credit card debt. We can't take that into consideration. Another thing that schools also can't necessarily evaluate perhaps right now are future changes. So Julie and I were discussing a family for Northeastern that they expect that in a year, the parent may be losing their job. And so while we empathize with that, and the situation itself was a very kind of, you know, sad situation, there's little that we can do until an actual change has occurred. So we cannot necessarily take in information and act on things that may be occurring. Often families will reach out about the plans to retire in 2, 3, 4 years and want us to look at that now. But the caveat with that are for future changes, most institutions will look at that when the change actually happens. So most institutions will work with you when the change that you're expecting to happen in a year or 2 years from now actually happens. So that is the beauty of financial aid. We can look at these appeals at any time. And so while I understand it's difficult because you're trying to make a decision and trying to figure out where you will be for the next 4 to 5 years, most schools will continue to work with you as circumstances arise, even if you know right now they may be occurring in the future. But traditionally, we're looking at things that are changing your income, changing the information on the tax forms, and we really won't be evaluating things that are not necessarily on your tax form or things that we already are aware of. Often families will appeal to say, I have 2 students in college. Our financial aid forms do take that into consideration. So it's not so much an appeal, we have that information. So those are some things to consider.
Thank you. And Caitlin, I have a question that we
Julie,
received.
can I just jump in for one
Yeah,
second?
please.
I'm so sorry, but something that I didn't think of, and as I put some of the pieces together here, in terms of the timing of appealing, you want to make sure that you have applied for financial aid first. I think my colleagues would agree with that for the most part, yes. So we've had a few cases at Dean where the family already knows they have circumstances. So they're trying to start with their change of circumstances. But in financial aid, we need to start with your baseline application. So get your financial aid application done, get your financial aid award, and you might be surprised. So, you know, make sure that you know what you're dealing with in terms of what your eligibility is based on the application itself. Then from there, come back and submit your appeal with your change of whatever your circumstances might be. So I just wanted to make sure that we understood the timing.
That's so important. Thank you. That's great. And so the question I'm going to give to you, Caitlin, is one that we received this week from a family who said, you know, if the financial aid offer for my students' top choice schools are just not enough money, as others have said, they're just not affordable. Then what other choices? What can we do?
Sure. So if you are in a situation where your first choice, it's just not financially possible for you, there are plenty of options. And like Iris said, there is an option and a college for everyone. And you should certainly consider attending your community colleges and state institutions because they are extremely affordable and accessible. Quinsigamond, where I work, for a full-time in-state student, they pay under $7,000 a year to attend. So it's a fantastic value, and it's a place where you can go to get your general education courses out of the way, and get your associate's degree and earn a credential, and then eventually transfer to either another state school or the private school that perhaps was your first choice later on. And I think community colleges are a fantastic option, especially right now, where a lot of the high-cost private schools are remote anyways. So if you're going to be, remote or hybrid and not necessarily getting that full college experience in person, you can certainly consider taking your courses remotely at a community college and saving a lot of money. We have a lot of transfer agreements as well. There's mass transfer, which allows you to get your associates and then transfer all of your credit to a public institution to get your bachelor's degree. And then there are also articulation agreements that allow you to get your associates and then transfer directly to a private school to get your bachelor's. So they are a fantastic option, as well as the other state institutions, not even necessarily a community college. The state colleges are very affordable, and as well as the state universities. So there is an option for everyone. And if you apply on time at the community college level and you demonstrate high financial need, your entire bill could be paid with grant funding. And even if you are not eligible for grants, everyone, if you meet the basic criteria and apply for financial aid by completing the FAFSA, you are at the very, very least eligible for an unsubsidized Stafford loan for the amount of $5,500 for a first-year student. So borrowing that low interest loan will pay almost all of your bill. And if you can't afford anything out of pocket to get you to that full price tag, you could consider attending part-time. So college there is an option for everyone. So you certainly consider the public institutions, the community colleges, the state colleges, and the universities, because they are accessible and affordable, and a great way to save a lot of money. Because if I knew what I know now back then, I would have been in a lot less debt. So definitely consider that.
Thank you so much. So we've heard a lot about appeals due to changes in financial circumstances, but this question, Bill, I'm going to ask you is a little bit different. It's, a family just asking, what if, other colleges gave more money, more scholarships and grants than my first or second choice school? Can I negotiate based on the fact that I receive more funding from other institutions?
Great question. The whole concept of negotiating an award letter or an award or an offer. I the vast majority, I think, of higher ed professionals probably would not like the word negotiate. However, with that being said, this is where it really depends. I would love to live in a world where there was not negotiation. However, I think the reality is that there are some institutions out there that we know about that will negotiate. They will work with families and they will evaluate competitor offers as part of an appeal process. Where that gets tricky and it gets more specific is in the type of fund that they're evaluating that for. So generally speaking, financial aid dollars come in the form of merit scholarships, need-based monies, and then self-help or loans and work studies. So there's three main buckets there. And what you're appealing may depend on the answer to that question as to what can be negotiated, right? So if you're looking at comparing institutions purely on need-based strategies, well, if it's simply need-based aid, you'd want to follow up with the financial aid offices and determine how it is they determined that need-based formula. Was it an institutional methodology? Did they use the CSS profile, or did they just use the FAFSA form? And that way you could get a sense of how they're evaluating you. And that may not be negotiable, right? That may not be something that you could compare awards to, because each school that's allocating need-based aid may allocate it differently to different students for different reasons. On the merit-based side, if you're receiving funding from an institution that's based more on admission criteria, that does not require an application for financial aid, that also could depend on the school that you're appealing to. Some schools will say absolutely not. The merit scholarships that have gone out are what they are, and they can't. We won't take appeals on those. Other institutions will say absolutely. Let us know. Let us know information. When you're thinking about an appeal, I think it's really important if you just take a step back and think about it from the standpoint of what information does the institution not have on me that I could now provide? If you are regurgitating information that's in your admission application or your financial aid record, it's that information that the school used to get you to your initial aid offer. And so if you're thinking of how do I appeal, what has changed or what is new that the school doesn't know about? So, and that's why the negotiation sometimes comes in, because that could be for some institutions, the what is new. And so if you think about appeals from that standpoint, rehashing what you get is typical, or the information you've already provided is typically not as valuable to the institution. One final thing, because I think it was a question that ties into this in the chat, was on merit scholarships. And I received grades since, I have a new transcript since I got my merit scholarship, or how will pass fail as a result of COVID impact this? That all is going to be dependent on the specific school. But when it comes to merit scholarships, typically speaking, one additional semester of grades or term is probably not going to make that much of a difference in how the institution determined what merit to get you. In fact, you could make the argument that the institution expects that you maintain or at least exceed that level of academic rigor that you've already achieved on your transcript thus far. So one additional term is probably not going to matter too much or strengthen your appeal.
Thank you. So Ebony, back to you. We have a question that the CSS profile, and I know Northeastern requires that, the CSS profile collects information from both parents, but my other parent is not going to help with college at all. What should I do?
Yes, we are often asked that question. And I will say that back when I hosted or would host a number of financial aid nights, we always kind of started the evening with a discussion on kind of the responsibility for paying, or who is responsible for that. And first and foremost, we would kind of lead the evening with the expectation is that the student and their family have the primary responsibility for financing that education, funding that education. Often students feel the first spot belongs to the school, but in reality, most institutions, again, have this bucket of money that they have to work with. If you take, for example, Northeastern, we have about 70,000 students applying. We'll admit, let's say 25 or so of them, and about half of those are applying for financial aid, but we have kind of a limited bucket. And in trying to divide that money equitably, divide it between the merit as well as the need base, we have to kind of set guidelines of evaluation. And so for us, one of the institutions that uses CSS profile, we ask for information from both parents, even if one of them is the non-custodial, and even in circumstances where occasionally some of them will say they are not planning on contributing. For those students that are experiencing situations where they're unable to reach their non-custodial, or they have a negative relationship, or they have court orders preventing them from reaching out to them, we have a waiver process. So therefore, we're not trying to collect that information, but when we're able to get the information, we're first trying to evaluate what resources, what availability of funding is there within this family unit. And so while it is unfortunate when a parent is indicating that they may not be able to pay, the same can happen for a custodial parent. So it's not that we don't hear those stories as well, where a custodial parent is saying that is on the shoulders of the student and that the parent is not going to assist with that. I would say that depending on the situation, it is always good to talk to your school. I mean, I know that, you know, for the most part, you'll probably hear something similar to what I'm saying about equity and about trying to kind of make sure we're providing our resources where possible. But if there is truly something unique about the situation that the paperwork did not show, always reach out to the institution. But really what this whole process is, this whole process of applying for aid, applying to a number of schools, is trying to figure out what is most affordable for you as the student and for your family. And so again, while we understand that you perhaps have your heart set at an institution or you're making plans or things like that, it is important to evaluate what will the cost or expense or the needs be if I attend this school over another, because each school is evaluating things differently, be it that they don't use CSS profile, it's FAFSA only. And so that's really what you're trying to do in this time between now and May 1st, for those that have that deadline, is trying to pick the best affordable option for yourself. But for the most part, schools that are using that will need information from both parents, even if they decide they do not wish to contribute to the education.
Thank you. And I have sort of a similar question for you, Caitlin, where a student asked, I can't get my parents to complete the FAFSA. What do you recommend?
Sure. So, you know, this does happen. And when it does, it's usually one of two kind of circumstances. The first would be in a situation where the parent just doesn't want to provide their information. They refuse, you know, because a lot of times it's because they believe it's going to obligate them to pay. And so sometimes it can be, you know, resolved by simply explaining, you know, just because you provide your information, and it is a lot, it's your, you know, your social security number, your date of birth, all of that, putting your information on the FAFSA, pulling down information from the IRS. It's giving your personal information. But if, you know, you explain, just because you're providing the information, it doesn't mean that you have to pay or that you have to borrow a loan. A lot of times explaining that, the parent will eventually come around, but of course there are situations where they refuse, they simply refuse. So if you are in a situation of, we call it parent non-support, where the parent does simply refuse to give their information or provide any financial support to the student, they would not be eligible for a dependency override, but they would basically just have to go through a process to be considered for an unsubsidized loan only. And that would essentially be writing a letter, the parent writing a letter stating that they refuse to complete the FAFSA, and that they won't provide any financial support for the student. And then again, the student would be eligible for that unsubsidized loan only, which is like $5,500 in the first year, $6,500 in the second year, and $7,500 in the third and fourth years. And then the other situation is a dependency override, where the student either has no contact with their parents, has no knowledge of their parents' whereabouts. It's a situation of abuse or neglect. And that would be basically the dependency override process, which is, again, providing a letter explaining the situation in detail, and then also providing that third-party documentation from an adult who has knowledge of the situation. And this is, you know, a guidance counselor, a teacher, a clergyman, a lawyer, a DCF worker, something of that nature. And this is the process, you know, from the federal methodology side of things. Sometimes if someone is awarding large amounts of institutional funding, they may have their own, you know, adjustments to the process, but generally speaking, especially at the kind of state institutions, those are kind of the two scenarios that we see and the two ways that we would collect information. But both scenarios do require collection of documentation, just about like everything else that we do, including, you know, the application process and the appeal process. But if you're, you know, if the parent is refusing to give their information or you're unable to obtain it, those are generally the two ways that we would go about that.
Thank you so much. That's great. Gail, I know that, again, it's been a year. Medical issues and even death have been a major issue. How has this affected financial aid applications and the appeal process?
Yeah, I hope what's coming through in all of our comments is that there's very little in financial aid that is, you know, cast in stone. There's, you know, a whole process that financial aid administrators exercise that's called professional judgment. And so that is, you know, we are taking into account personal circumstances. So the most important thing is, as soon as you know something has happened that you know is basically permanent, especially like a death, you know, at the point that you're able to address kind of next steps, you want to be in touch with the school. And adjustments can be made in terms of applications that have already been filed to remove income for a parent that is, you know, that is not going to be continuing. If there are significant medical expenses, those are things that you want to document. What is the actual impact to the family? How much have you actually paid? And that's one thing that you may hear consistently from schools, is that there is a difference between incurring medical expenses and actually, you know, paying for those medical expenses. So you want to keep that documentation of what you've paid and then provide it to the school. I was trying to think if there's something else that I was going to say about that. But there are so many, you know, different circumstances, and, you know, as financial aid professionals, you know, our goal is to work with you. Our goal is to find as many, you know, creative options for opening the doors as possible. None of us are here to try to calculate the highest number we can. We do not get commissions for the highest family contribution we can calculate. So our goal is to try to make it as affordable as possible, utilizing the resources that we have. And unfortunately, no matter who we are, from all of our institutions, on some level, those resources are going to be limited.
Thanks, Gail. And Iris, can you talk a little bit about residency, students choosing to live on campus, off campus, and how all of that could impact financial aid for the fall?
Sure, that's a great question. And this might vary somewhat from one school to another, but there's certain aspects of it that are the same. So let me use the example of a student, what we would call a resident student, someone living on campus. You can see a residence hall right behind me in my picture, actually. And so that's a student living on campus, paying room and board. And so their cost to attend the college is more expensive than a student who might be commuting from home or living off campus in an apartment. So all of those costs are determined when we calculate your financial need, which then turns into your financial aid award. If you want to reduce your cost, then if you live within commuting distance, then that certainly is a great way to reduce your cost and still get the education at that school. However, in most cases, the financial aid will also be adjusted based on that reduced cost that you have. Generally, though, your net cost, if you will typically be less if you're commuting from home, for example. And now you also need to be careful because at some schools, the merit scholarship that's often awarded through the admission office might also have a requirement that you live on campus in order to receive that scholarship or to receive the amount of that scholarship. I'll give you an example. At Dean, we have two different levels of scholarship. So we do consider all of our applicants for a scholarship, but if you are a resident student, you will receive a higher amount than if you're a commuting student, because we recognize that your cost is significantly different. Now, every school doesn't do it this way, but you do want to make sure you're reading all of the information that is sent to you, both from admissions and from financial aid, to make sure you know what the requirements are. Some schools do it a little bit differently, and they have the same level of a merit aid, and either through admissions or financial aid, they might offer some kind of housing award or a housing grant, or different schools will call it different things. So that's another situation where the expectation is that you're living on campus. And if you decide to move off campus, then that's money that you will not have available anymore for your cost to attend that institution. So it's a great way to, consider what your cost is going to be. But you also want to be very careful with the financial aid that you've received to see if anything is dependent on what your residency status is.
That's great advice. And Ryan, I'm wondering if you can give some words of wisdom to parents and students about having these conversations about affordability at this time.
Julie, I love this question because all of my kids are little. And so I can talk about having, financial conversations with your teenagers like it's normal, and that parents love to do that. So some families are very open about the family's finances, and some families don't share that kind of information with 17 and 16 and 18-year-olds. Depending on what the dynamic is like in your family, you all have to think about what the plan is for communicating about what's affordable when it comes to college. So does that mean that you're going to have the sit down conversation and say, listen, mom and dad, or dad and dad, or mom and mom can only afford this much. And if you want to go onto that campus, it's going to cost more than that. Who's going to pay for that? Who's going to borrow? If there is a loan to be had, there are loans for students, there are loans for parents, and there are loans for third parties. If you find a third party that wants to borrow for you for college, hang on to them. They're a good one. But there's options out there, and that conversation needs to happen before the student falls in love with the campus, right? So I think Ebony was the one that said that there's going to come a moment in this college search process where a 17-year-old person or a 40-year-old person is going to fall in love with Dean College or with Stonehill or wherever they end up going. And if you find out that at the point that you're in love with that campus and you've met your new roommate and you're planning and you bought the shirt with the college name right across it, and that college is not affordable, I promise you that is going to be a bad day. Some families, as I said, don't like to have these conversations. They're uncomfortable. They're weird. They're not something that a family is accustomed to sometimes. But that conversation, as uncomfortable as it is in the summer or the fall, a year before college, is a whole lot easier than that conversation in the spring or the summer when it comes to a realization that that a college might not be affordable. Additionally, that borrowing conversation needs to happen relatively early. Borrowing is a real part of financing a college education in the United States. If we were all living in Germany right now, we wouldn't be having this conversation because higher education is subsidized by the government. You can have your opinion on that, but here we are in the United States where borrowing and using borrowed funds, loan funds to pay for college is extremely common. But the decision about who is doing that borrowing is not common. Sometimes it is the parents, sometimes it is exclusively the students, and sometimes it's a mix. How much can we afford? How much are we willing to borrow? And who's going to borrow are real good conversations to have early in this college search process.
That's terrific.
And
So,
I just want to, Julie, I just want to echo what Ryan was saying and emphasize, as challenging as it may be, this is the time to have the family conversation, because none of us want to have a conversation with a sophomore or a junior or a senior, and we've all had them, who comes to our office and says, my parents have decided that they can no longer help me. What can you do for me? And because that's not what we are planning for. We are planning to continue the offer of financial aid based on the how it was analyzed at the beginning. So please be upfront with your child about your abilities early on, and it will help everybody.
Yeah, such good
Julie,
advice.
if I can just jump in as well, just to
Yeah.
take it one step further from Gail, taking it from Ryan, because I've been thinking it the whole time you guys were talking. If for the parents out there and for the students who might be joining us, make sure you're multiplying, right? It's so often, particularly for those of you that are first-time families, you're looking at how can we afford this year? This is what it's going to cost. We think we can do it. If you're looking at a 2-year school, please multiply by 2. If you're looking at a 4-year school, please multiply by 4. If grad school is in your future and you already know that, make sure you're taking that into consideration as well. It's so frequent. We see it a lot at Dean College that the family is so excited about the admission to college and they fell in love with us. And as Ryan said, they bought the sweatshirt. And they make it through year 1, and then year 2 or year 2.5 comes along and they're like, we can't do it anymore. We have nothing left because they didn't think long-term in their planning. So it's critical for students and parents that you think the long-term, because starting and just getting that 1 year under your belt and having this wonderful experience where now you've made all your friends and you really want to go back, and now the reality is that you can't afford to go back. That's worse than making the really difficult decision in the first place not to have gone to your dream school. We don't want to be crushers here, but we also want to protect your financial longevity and not have you in a position of either never graduating from college or not considering all of your options to be affordable all the way through to your degree.
So great. Thank you. And, I know Stephanie and Jonathan have been busy answering questions behind the scenes. I think we have about 5 minutes. If there were any burning questions that you feel the panel could add some additional information about.
Julie, while they're collecting the questions, there is a question in the chat from Sophie about public college financial aid offers. Sophie and everyone, most of your public colleges and universities are going to be providing financial aid awards in a rolling fashion, meaning it's not something we wait for. Once we have an admission application, and a financial aid application, which at a public university is usually just the FAFSA, then you're going to receive a financial aid package shortly thereafter, or you're going to receive a request for some additional information. Maybe some documents might be needed from you, but it's relatively quick, and it happens in sequence as applications and financial aid applications come in. Thank you for the question, Sophie.
Hi, Julie. Sorry about that. So one question that we're getting over and over and over again is appealing merit-based aid. So in short and sweet, however, specifically, I'll call you out, Ebony. They asked about appealing at Northeastern. So if you want to start, thank you.
Sure. Kind of similar to what Bill alluded to. A lot of our decisions are based on the materials that you provided with your admissions application. And so we looked at your grades throughout your high school career, your activities, the essays, et cetera. So we have a very holistic approach when evaluating for our merit scholarships. And for the most part, at least at Northeastern, the merit decisions that we make are final at the point that we're releasing them. And the only thing that kind of is left on the table is our National Merit Scholarship, because we need to wait for students to designate us as their first choice and notify us that they are listed as National Merit finalists. But for the most part, we don't really reconsider merit. Again, if there is a circumstance where there was something just missing from your admissions file, not thinking about midterm grades or anything like that, but just there was a packet of information that we just did not know, and it relates to your academics, again, I would reach out to our admissions office. But in most circumstances, what students are requesting is a review because X school has provided this amount in merit and you did not. Also, it is because of midterm grades or things like that. I will say that often it's difficult because, you know, as a 17 or 18-year-old, often there are things attached to the offer of merit or potentially the price of merit that they take on to themselves. It's like personal characteristics, and it's really not related to that. You know, if you think of every institution, they are looking at an applicant pool that's varied, an applicant size that's varied. And so they have to make decisions based on the GPAs and the SATs, if they are a test school, or just, again, the characteristics of that applicant pool. And so it could just be that based on that pool, they have had to create a bar that there are several talented students that may not receive a merit award, but that in no way diminishes their talent. And they should not feel that because they're offered X amount for merit versus a different amount for merit, that again speaks to their talent or their abilities as a student. Again, it's all about trying to take this bucket that you have and provide some sort of ability to assist students with affordability. And so that's just, again, my spiel, because I just know that, again, with this whole concept of dream school and this, you know, I don't want to be a dream crusher, but I do want students to know they are valued and they have a lot of talents. But at the same time, most institutions, in my experience, are not necessarily going to appeal merit, but as we've said throughout the evening, it is good for you to kind of connect with the individual institutions or review their websites. But for Northeastern, we don't really negotiate for merit-based appeals. So,
Thank you.
I have an interesting question here from someone who wants to know, how are schools considering academic merit award appeals if a student's final GPA was affected by a high school's decision to do no grades calculations, switching to a pass or fail last spring due to COVID, and narrowly misses the next merit tier? So I thought that was interesting, and I apologize if it was covered from a different question. But
I'll start, but I bet a number of us have a similar answer to this one. Listen, folks, COVID-19 blew us all up, right? So the last year has been nothing like normal. And that goes for college admission. It goes for college financial aid. And we've seen it, right? We've seen colleges no longer require the SAT because students couldn't take SATs because there was a worldwide pandemic around us. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that most of the colleges that your student is looking at is not going to adversely affect your financial aid because your school made a COVID-19 related decision. You know, of course, every appeal decision comes down to an institution to institution review. and you should certainly approach your colleges to find out exactly how that might affect you. But I want to, whoever's asking that question, I want to give you enough confidence to know that the folks on this screen and the rest of the folks that are doing financial aid for you at your colleges do not want a worldwide pandemic to cause you to have an adverse effect on your financial aid. So you should have pretty good confidence that your school is going to continue to support you.
Julie, let me jump in because we're dealing with this a lot at Dean, and I would imagine every other admissions office that does the merit decision through the admissions office. And it has been a bit of a challenge. Many, I'd argue most, certainly at Dean, the high school GPA is the predominant factor, particularly now with the tests being so difficult to get. And we've been test optional for a while anyway, but some students would submit those test scores to try to bump up their eligibility for a merit scholarship. Anyway, so we have had to use the GPA that's, from that high school transcript. And some students, I think this is getting to the question that's being asked, might have been adversely affected by the opportunity to have improved their GPA from at whatever point junior year they may have been impacted. Because the school decided to go all credit or no credit or pass fail or however they did it. And so there really wasn't a GPA calculation that was able to improve that. I can only give you 2 examples that I've had at Dean so far where I was able to help the student significantly. And this was a case where the student did really have grades, but because the college did not put grades on the transcripts, we didn't have it. He was able to go back to his teachers through his school counselor, provide those grades to us because they did make a difference to his GPA. And we, again, to Ryan's point, did not want to disadvantage him because of the decision that his high school made. Because he was able to get those grades to us in an official capacity, we did take that into consideration and increase his scholarship. That has not been easy for most students to get. And for many students, frankly, they didn't want to go down that road because they struggled with the pandemic and if anything, were more adversely affected. So I don't know if that helps at all, but it has certainly been a struggle. We're using the best information that we have and trying to work with families if they have these more unique situations to try to acknowledge that and assist.
Thank you. And, I have a question. We've received this week at MEFA, we've received a lot of questions just generally about the wait list. I don't know if Gail, do you just want to say a couple of words about the wait list for the audience?
Yeah, the wait list is going to vary at each institution. They can be pretty hefty wait list in terms of the numbers. I would say most institutions probably don't have an ordered wait list. It's not a specific list, but if you're interested in a school, you should respond and say, yes, please keep me on the wait list, because schools will certainly go to that first. And make sure that everything in the admission application is complete. If they're asking for grades, make sure the grades have been received. If they've, make sure that all teacher recs have been received. So it can't hurt to send an email and just say, I'm very interested in the school. I hope there might be consideration. I just want to make sure that my application is complete. With portals, you can certainly do that through the application portal to make sure things have been received. But it's very possible that at the end of the day, the way most colleges are using the wait list is to kind of fill in the gaps after they've been able to see the composition of the students that are responding. And so at each college, that could be something different. At one college, they could be, they're looking for, all of our colleges are looking for balance and diversity across the spectrum. So we're looking for a 50-50 representation in male and female. We're looking for students across the academic disciplines. We're looking for students in certain sports or certain art components. And so as schools look at who has responded, they're going to try to kind of one-off fill in the blanks. So no student should be concerned about, if you get asked or offered a spot from the wait list or you don't, it may have absolutely nothing to do with your quality or candidacy. There are some colleges that may also be looking to for financial benefit. So they may be looking to families that have a greater ability to pay so that they can kind of make all their numbers work. Just be careful with that. Do not promise something that you cannot fulfill. So don't say that you can pay for a college if you know that you can't, and then try to turn around and ask for money later, because that's not going to be a good strategy, and it's only going to leave students in a hurt spot. So that's what I'll say about the wait list.
Thank you. And I know you've all given a lot of time. I guess I'll just check in with Jonathan and Stephanie to see if there's just one or two more questions, and then we'll say goodnight to everyone.
Stephanie, do you want to take it, or do you want me to pick one?
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Okay.
Julie, I think there are a lot of questions too about timing. And I don't know if we feel like people got good answers on the timing. Colleges are really trying to get through appeals as quickly as possible. So I would say, we're looking for within a couple weeks, we're trying to respond to appeals. It's possible that some schools will take a pause right now as they're trying to get all the decisions out and make sure that if you're newly completing, you're getting an aid award. But colleges are well aware of what their deposit deadlines are. So if they have a May 1st deposit deadline, or they have a May 15th or a June 1st, they know what the date is. So calling them saying, I need an answer because your deposit deadline is May 1st, they're going to be doing everything possible to get you a decision before that happens. We all want you to have the most information possible to make an informed decision. So the best thing you can do is, if you know you need to appeal, get it in as quickly as you can. If you appeal the last week before the deposit deadline, it is possible that you won't have a decision, by that deadline. You can certainly contact the admission office and ask if they can give you an extension. That's also possible.
Thank you. All right. I don't know, Jonathan, Stephanie, otherwise.
We have lots of questions that we might not be able to get to. We've had well over 100. So we're still typing away at individual questions, but I think some of the repeat questions have been answered.
That's great.
Do you mind if I just say one thing? I had
not at all.
In the chat of questions. It was related to kind of what happens after the deposit deadline, to the funds that were kind of undistributed or things like that. And I often hear that from families, and they use that as a method of, I don't know, financing, or, they'll say, I'll deposit, and then I'm sure after the deposit deadline, there'll be more funds to kind of give out to the students. And that's not true. That is absolutely not true. We spend a lot of time with a lot of different people at our institutions trying to calculate and plan for what the class will be. And so there is no redistribution of wealth after the deposit deadline. In fact, for most institutions, we sometimes are over what we thought. And so we're recalibrating and figuring things out. And so it is important to make your decisions on what you are able to do, and not necessarily what you think may happen once they have their class, because they're going to have this unused assortment of money. That is not something that really happens at institutions. So it's really important to make your decision based on what you have on paper, what you have in hand as that offer from that school.
Ebony, that's great. Thank you for saying that.
Julie,
Right,
so there is one common
Great.
theme that I'm finding. Folks are asking about aid if a student is transferring or they take a gap year. Will the school still honor that same aid? So gap year is one. We've gotten a lot of those, as well as if the student transfers into a school. can they expect the same type of aid as a freshman? So whoever wants to tackle that, go for it, guys.
I'll
I
jump
vote Bill.
in.
I
I can jump in real quick on both of them. It's going to vary by school. So let me just put that out there. I'll give you an example of Dean. A lot of schools do this, but there's a lot of schools that don't. In the case of a gap year, our requirement is if you pay your enrollment deposit and then ask to defer your admission for a year, we will give you that same level of scholarship, good for 1 year. In the case of a transfer situation, you're now in a completely different category. So you would need to reapply as a transfer student. Dean College actually, and we are not alone, made a decision just 2 or 3 years ago to fund transfer students quite generously, and in some cases even more than freshmen. Because we really wanted to be very transfer friendly and found a lot of students who were unable to afford 4 years at Dean doing the route that Caitlin was talking about earlier, going to community college first and then coming to Dean for the 2 years. And we recognized that financially it was a stretch. For us, it was only assisting for 2 years instead of 4 years, and we were able to give and are able to give very generous transfer scholarships. So that's an example at Dean, but it's going to vary widely from school to school. So I don't know, Gail, Bill, somebody else wants to jump in on that.
Yeah, the only
At
thing.
Amherst, because we're distributing need-based aid, we treat our transfer students exactly the same as our first year students. And because we also only award need-based aid for a student who takes a gap year, you would have to reapply for financial aid. But if your financial circumstances are similar, you should expect a similar financial aid package. Over to you, Bill.
Yeah, Gail, as always, Gail nails it. She hits the nail on the head. It depends on the type of aid that you're dealing with there, is whether or not you would need to reapply. Because if it is need-based that you're receiving, then it would be based on that next year that you've applied for your next tax year. What I will say is, and this ties into what Caitlin said earlier, and just as it's families, and most of the families and students that are on this call probably are in the Massachusetts or the local region. And one thing that you have to your advantage is the wide variety of high quality education at your fingertips. And these different pathways, as evident by the question, I think this group would agree, I think, not putting words in their mouth, that if you can find more affordable, creative pathways, we all want to see you at our institutions, absolutely. But we're not the admission representatives. We also have approached this from a lens of affordability and helping you achieve those academic goals that you want to achieve. And you have a tremendous opportunity in this region to be surrounded by a wide variety of schools with different strategies, with different missions, and also at different levels, community college, regional states, university systems, and then private institutions. Take advantage of these different pathways that are not possible in other parts of the country.
Thank you so much. And, I think we're going to end there. What I will say is, just from listening to all of you, I think you have shown all of the parents, all of the students who are listening to us tonight that, they have a place to go with questions. You at the institutions have their best interests in mind, and it made that so clear tonight. So I hope parents and students that you will see that and know that there are resources to help you as you navigate this next month or so. So please reach out to your colleges. You can reach back out to MEFA if you have further questions. And we're just so glad you joined us, and hope that this was really helpful. And thank you all panelists. I can see some comments that families were just very, very appreciative of all of the advice and the thoughts that you gave. So thank you. And thank you,
you,
Stephanie and Jonathan. Sure, your typing fingers are sore.
We tried to get to as many as we could. And we saw the panels were also sneaking in there and helping us answer some questions. So thank you to you guys as well for helping with the chat. Appreciate it.
Yeah, that was a big help. Thanks.
Thank you,
Thank you
MEFA.
All right. Take
Bye,
care.
everybody.
Good,
Have a
good
great
luck.
night.
Good
Nice to
night.
see you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.